Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Goff, and I'm Principal Product Marketing here at Revenera, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, AI, SaaS, and Data Monetization Trends for 2025. Are you ready? It's no surprise that software monetization is evolving rapidly, from advancements in AI and the continued growth of SaaS to evolving business models and the ever-increasing need for automation. It's essential that your business is positioned to meet customer needs and grow profitability. So I'm really excited that we have Nicole Segerer, SVP and General Manager of Revenera, with us today. Nicole has a deep understanding of the software market and speaks with executives in the industry nearly every day. So she is very well positioned to address the market changes that are coming and to share some insights that you can use to adapt and to thrive. Before we get started, though, let's quickly go over a few housekeeping details. First, today's discussion will be about 30 minutes long, and if you have any questions or comments, please add them in the Q&A tab, and we'll try to answer them as we go along or at the end if time allows. If we don't get to your questions, we will follow up with you individually after the event. Also, please be sure to check out the Handouts tab where we've shared a number of resources related to today's topic. And finally, we will be sending you a link to the recording within the next 48 hours or so. So with that, let's get started. Nicole?
Thanks, Michael. And thanks everyone for joining us here today to talk about AI, SaaS, and data monetization. We will be spending 30 minutes together. Please feel free to share your questions anytime. I'm happy to be interrupted and to answer any questions. And what we really want to do today is give you a high-level overview on what you should be thinking about as you're developing and bringing new offerings to the market. I myself have been in the business of software monetization for more than a decade by now. And I spend most of my time as a general manager out there speaking with our customers, prospects, and have a relatively broad view of what companies are doing. And some of that will certainly flow into our conversations today. Some of you might not know Revenera, so I'll be really quick. I promise it won't take more than 2.5 minutes. Revenera is a division of Flexera, and Revenera really works exclusively with software and technology companies, and we help them monetize their software, understanding what their customers are entitled to use, how much they are using, and implementing business models for growth. Which really takes us to what we can help you do and what's going to drive some of our discussions today. Also, the discussions will be about market and less about Revenera. You probably, as you're all technology companies, you probably find yourself in one or two or many of the 4 points on the screen here. Many of you come from a world of on-premises software, perpetual license models, and you are slowly but surely moving into the world of SaaS, data and AI. And really, as part of that, you have two needs. One is to transition to SaaS for some or for all of your solutions. Some of you might be working for technology companies that also have physical devices that will always be on premises. And as part of the transitioning to SaaS, and there's also a transition to new revenue models. So everyone wants to move to recurring revenue. A subscription often has a way higher value than the one-off sale of a physical good or of a perpetual software license. So there's a need to transition to new models, but then at the same time, there is a need to monetize your on-premises software, because that is where very often the profitability sits. And that is where you have a larger part of your customer base. And that is where you make some of the money that you need to transition into the new world of SaaS and recurring revenue. And then, of course, you want to make sure that your customers are also compliant. We will focus a lot on the right-hand side here today, but I also wanted to just start out with telling you what Revenera is doing and who we are working with. You see some of our metrics at the bottom of the slide. I will only talk about one. Revenera is a vendor of a software monetization system. And through that solution, we monetize $50 billion of annual customer revenue that basically of customers that use our system to monetize their software. That's what we stand for. That's what we do most. And that's where our discussions will happen today, especially around data, AI, and SaaS monetization. So let's get started, and let's get started with looking at AI, because it's a hot topic of the last couple of years. And as I spent my time working with many of you and many of your peers in the industry, there isn't a single discussion that doesn't have an AI discussion. It's a maturity discussion more than anything. Some companies are just starting out, building new AI models, thinking about what they could be doing, where potentially the customer value could sit. And others are further along and have already launched solid and mature AI offerings. And non-surprising, of course, some of the big software vendors of the world are leading the path here. So let's look at some of those examples and then summarize what that means from a monetization perspective. So I just took some screen grabs this morning from some of the companies that we all know. Microsoft Copilot is a great example for an AI offering. When you think about how AI gets monetized, there's usually one out of two ways of thinking about it. It's actually three. One way is, and we'll get to that in a second, it makes your offering so much better that you sell more of your overall offering and you don't need to monetize the AI features in particular, just because your assumption is that you're going to sell way more on the broader offering. That works in some areas. I have an example here, 2 slides on, but mostly it is what we see here on this slide. It is either a premium feature that gets sold in addition to an existing product, or it's a premium feature that gets sold in addition to an existing product, but not at a fixed price, but as in a usage-based model. That has been, in the short time we have AI offerings on the market and being monetized, those 2 models have really stood out. So one is, again, a premium feature. The other is a usage-based component where customers pay per transaction, per question, etc. Which is also some things that we see with Salesforce. Salesforce with the Agent Force offering has come out with a $2 per conversation model, which has been quoted and copied by many of the other players in the industry and has led the path to really go down to a model where customers pay per transaction, right? And a transaction could be, in AI, it's very often a conversation or it's a certain activity that gets done by an agent. A transaction could also be anything else. It can be an API call, can be something that gets produced, delivered, whatever it is. But those models have surely come up. But then we also see those that I have alluded to in the beginning. Some companies use AI, and we see that a lot in the business to consumer space, to make their offerings so much better that they are basically working. That's a Booking.com example. They have come to market with a better travel planning based on AI features. And it's just part of their solution because the assumption is that it would differentiate their solution better. They would be selling more and makes their customers happier. So there is no need to monetize AI separately. But those are some of the models that I'm seeing over and over again. And today we want to talk about what you should be thinking about as you develop your own models, what should be driving your decisions, but then also how would you implement it so that it really works. There's 2 ways to any monetization strategy. And one way is a business discussion. We'll start with that now to talk about how should you even think about monetization. And then the other is how can you get it done? And those 2 need to go together. Some companies have the best plans, but then fail with implementation, which means that leads to revenue leakage, a poor customer experience, et cetera. And some companies don't spend time on the overall business plan, but are great with execution. But that might mean that it doesn't deliver on the business plan. So we always recommend that there should be a business plan first, a business idea on how things should be monetized based on what the company goals are and what your customers expect from you. The customer should always be front and center to any of these discussions. And then the second question is how to implement. So we'll drive it in that order today. How to think about monetization. Any monetization plan needs to follow a business plan. And you see in that word cloud here just a few of the topics that keep yourselves and your peers in the industry busy, right? The question is, where do you want to focus? Do you want to focus on profitability? Why is profitability the biggest word here in that word cloud? It is because over the last few years, it has become extremely important for software companies to be profitable. There was a time when everything was about growth at all costs, and many companies just delivered on growth plans, but actually weren't profitable and burned a lot of money. And that is something that investors don't like that much anymore. the goal for most of the software companies is not growth at all costs, it's profitable growth. So that means that the growth strategy has to be in line with the monetization strategy. That means that he needs to be thinking about where most of the cost goes and then where the revenue comes in. And if these things hang together, we'll get to that in a second. Then, of course, we talk about AI here. There's a lot of companies building new AI models, new data models. Data and AI models often hang together, right? There's often additional new data offerings that are monetized separately, and then there is additional AI functionality on top of these data offerings to make more sense out of the data, right? That's a growth vector for many companies that they want to aggressively shift to. We talked about shifting to SaaS in the beginning. That can be a business model to say, okay, let's move our customers from on-premises products to SaaS. What do we need to do about that? And then there's many other factors that influence your decision making. The fact of the matter is, you know your internal drivers way better than I do, but it's always important to start any discussion with what is it that we even want, right? And then to drive from there. And what we are seeing, that slide here is from the FinOps Foundation. Some of you might certainly know them. They have come out and are quite successful over the last few years in really helping companies learn how to deal with cloud cost. Why am I talking about cloud cost? Because cloud cost, and then in addition now AI cost, is a big cost factor for any technology company. And with that, you are all getting into the motion of measuring not only what your overall cost is, but what the cost is per product line, the cost sometimes per customer. That's to the right-hand side when we talk about unit economics. Some software suppliers break down their costs per customer, per transaction, per application. And that gets really interesting because it shows you where you make your money and where you lose money. It shows you that certain customers are extremely expensive because they're highly transactional, other customers are not. So the thinking is, what does it do to your pricing and to your packaging strategy? And that is what we are going to discuss today. And a lot of what we do, and I brought it up in the examples in the beginning, when you think about AI and data monetization, or even any SaaS offering too, whether or not it has to do with AI and data, a lot of it is now driven by consumption. We are getting more and more away from just monetizing on a flat fee subscription or on just a seat-based subscription, because those models don't work also well. Why don't they work well? They don't work well because sometimes they don't provide upsell opportunities. They don't work well because those models are not necessarily fair between different types of customers. And user-based or seat-based models also come with a certain complexity, as in when I ask my customers to pay me per user, I am actually holding back their adoption because they think about every new user that they bring onto the system. So it can be a conflicting metric. And for that reason, a lot of companies are now going to usage-based models. You're seeing a very complex slide here from IDC. IDC, as part of their SaaS path, always does a really good job in finding out what it is that companies are doing from a pricing perspective. And what you see here, I'll summarize it for you. Everyone is thinking about consumption billing, right? When you look to the right-hand side, there's hardly any technology companies that are not thinking about consumption. But then when you go further to the left on this slide, then you also see that a lot of help is needed, that sometimes it's really hard to get the systems in place, or sometimes it's really hard to find the metrics that would work, because consumption means something different for every different software company out there. If we would start a survey now while we are on this webinar, and I would ask you all what you think consumption is, you would all come up with similar but slightly different definitions. So it's important to define what consumption or usage is for you, and how you can count it. And that needs good thinking going in, because otherwise it might be it might be something that doesn't work. And then also the supplier-buyer relationship has changed. A lot of you have, a lot of software companies have always held the usage very close to their chest. They didn't share with their customers what the actual usage was. But that has absolutely changed. Usage data is now being shared. If you're a software company, you probably have a customer portal that shows customers how much they're using and how much they still have left. And what gets monetized is changing as well. And this slide here is not complete by any means, and there could be a lot more detail on it. But I hope you see the thinking here, right? In a world of traditional on-premises software, what got monetized was relatively easy. Do I have access to an application? How many users? Which features can I use? In a SaaS world, or also in an intelligent device world, there's now way more things that get monetized. And let me move right to the right-hand side. Some of the things that work still work for SaaS, but then now there's a lot more. How long are people using the software? How much are they consuming? What is their data volume? How many API transactions are they completing? How many questions do they ask to the Gen AI tool? How much data are they producing, storing, or sharing? Those are now some of the metrics that get pulled into monetization models. And what that means is that any monetization solution that you apply needs to come with the flexibility to support all of these models so that you can implement them relatively quickly without depending on a lot of engineering work to enable some of those business models. And what's also important when I talk about monetization here, and some of you have been in this space for a long time, software monetization was often looked at as enforcement, or sometimes people thought that licensing would be just a way of cutting people off if there's no more licenses available. That's not how we look at it at monetization, and that's not how most of the modern monetization projects are done. I look at this as really the whole spectrum from the left to the right here, right? You still have some of you might be in businesses where you need strict enforcement. B2C business, if I've only paid for 100 transactions, you might not want to give me 102 transactions. But if you're in a B2B setting, you probably want to be very gracious with what you give to your customers. And if they overuse, you don't want to deny the service, but you rather would like to be informed. You would like to inform your customers that they're hitting their usage limits, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's guardrails, things that are getting implemented for fair usage to make sure that customers don't overuse certain performance-intensive or expensive features. And then there's value reporting. There's more and more, especially in the SaaS world. We are talking about SaaS monetization here as well. A lot of companies go away from some strict enforcement, but they implement a lot of usage insights so they can understand how exactly the software is being used. And then to notify the sales team and the customer of potential churn and upsell situations, because those things can be predicted. And with a tool like Revenera's tool, it's actually relatively easy to see what is being used. And is that going down or is that going up? And based on that, what does it mean for the customer relationship and where should the activity lie? So that is something too to think about. So when you plan out your monetization journey for new offerings, don't only think about where you want to limit your customers, also think about what you would like to understand about their usage and the value that they derive, which might drive your new or your future monetization models. And then how do you make this work? Again, this is a short summary today to drive more discussions if you like to, but we're hoping to giving you some thoughts here as to what you should be thinking about. So how do you make it work? First of all, when I work with companies on software monetization, it's very often driven out of product management. Product management decides that a certain monetization plan should be implemented, and they don't. In bigger companies, different product management teams that own different products don't always talk to each other. So that leads to different monetization models on different product lines. It leads to different systems being used, et cetera, et cetera. But there's one point here that I'd like to highlight, because when these things go into production and when you run software monetization at scale, your IT team is usually the team that needs to support the whole quote to cash process. And the IT team never has resources to spare, at least not in any company that I know. And the IT team needs to have full automation between a quote coming in, the usage being measured, an invoice going out, and a renewal happening. They cannot afford to have multiple different solutions. They cannot afford to have manual processes. It all needs to be automated. So when we talk about all these cool ideas that we mentioned before, think about how they could be implemented so that you can drive it at scale. Because as software companies, we all want to grow, and we need to make sure that these solutions scale. And when we talk about scaling, here is how Revenera thinks about this, right? Everything that we just talked about. Are there premium features? Are we counting usage? Are we selling in a token-based models that can be burned down? It's all basically managed around the entitlement. And the flow that usually happens is that an order comes down from a CRM system. The logos on the left and the right are just pure examples here to make it more visible for you, right? And then the software entitlement needs to be managed. And managing an entitlement also always means to know what are your customers entitled to use and what are they actually using. And then the usage data then gets handed off to the system that gets used for billing. And the interesting piece is when you look to the monetization service at Revenera, we call the implementation layer our monetization services. And you have cloud and local here. And some of you might ask yourself, why is there local? And local is there because if there's a device running on a site in a hospital, on an industrial production floor, there might be software running locally that also has data features, AI features connected to it, but there's implementation close to the device. So we always ask customers to say, well, is it all just a connected use case, as in a SaaS application that's always on, always connected, fully in the cloud, or is it a mix between local and the cloud? And in our world, we think that anything that you implement for monetization should work both locally and in the cloud. And that's what Revenera stands for, but that's also important for your customers and for your own business models, because that really makes sure that things are consistent. And you also can come up with this interesting model related to some of your on-premises devices or to on-premises software that you are selling. So it doesn't just stop with SaaS and cloud. AI and data offerings very often connect down to local devices and the usage of such devices. And then really related to the slides that we had before, think about what you would like to use out of the wide range of monetization models that exist. This is a marketing slide that all looks very clean and easy, but as I said before, when you think about each of those models, there's a lot of detail behind it. Why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because you should really think out of two reasons. A, it's important to think about how you'd like to monetize your software. And B, it's important to think about how you'd like to implement. Because the one thing that's also for sure when we think about data and AI monetization, everyone is just getting started. No one will get it right the first time. It's most likely that you will do some changes later. And then it's important to have a configurable system and to make sure that you can fine-tune your monetization models, bring new metrics in, bring new guardrails in as you go, without having to develop your own solutions for that. And what becomes more and more important with data and AI is something that you see here, and that's token or credit-based models. We also refer to it as elastic capacity. It's kind of all the same when it's said and done. Many of you are selling software today as a subscription, but what we saw in the beginning is that for software that's getting sold on a flat fee subscription, like Microsoft Office is an example for that, that doesn't work all that well anymore with an AI model. So does it mean that you have to change all of your monetization strategies? No. What a lot of companies are doing is that they settle token-based models on top of the flat fee subscription. That's probably the models that we see most, a mix between a flat fee subscription and then an ability for your customers to purchase upfront a set of tokens or credits that they can burn down. They can burn those down per transaction, per time of use, per anything that you decide to be a metric of value. And that gives you an ability and your customers to manage in a very predictable way what they use and what that costs them, and to scale up and down with their need, which is really what most customers would like to see. And it gives software suppliers a nice way to upsell based on value. And then, of course, in SaaS models, what you also want to think about is, how do you interact with the identity provider? How do you make sure that when a user comes into the system, let's say the user is called Tom, how do you make sure that Tom is really Tom? And then how do you integrate closely with what Tom can actually use? And how do you implement it in a way so that when you change your pricing and packaging, or your packaging specifically, that this also changes automatically? Because in SaaS, the interesting thing is that packaging doesn't always stay the same. In SaaS, we very often look at a good, better, and best model, and what features can be used as part of those three options that you offer to your customers can change. Very often, SaaS companies do a quarterly review, and they bring in new features, or they move some feature from the best model to the better model, etc., etc. That all needs to be automated so that your end customers always get to use the latest packaging version, right? We already talked about elastic token-based models. Those also need to be managed in real time so that end customers can always see how much they still have available and how much they've already used. And in that case, the supplier and buyer relationship has absolutely changed. And then the last point that I want to leave you with is that any monetization always then needs a lot of business insights. The times where, when you think about data, SaaS and AI monetization, the time where monetization models got implemented and never looked at again is over, at least in our view. It's really important to see how much your customers are actually using, what those trends are, and what is to be expected from the future, and to also share some of the data with your customers, which is why we at Revenera have enhanced our solution significantly in that space, to give you all of the data that you need to make successful pricing decisions. So this basically takes us 3 minutes to go. I will leave it here and maybe take a question or two before we drop. I see one question here in the chat, and that's exactly what I just referred to before. Is there any plan to offer AI transactions for on-premise software? Absolutely, we think that this is necessary. We at Revenera are working on token-based models for on-premise software. It's something that there's a lot of need, and that's why I just talked about cloud and on-premises options. It's something that we can talk about in more detail, but absolutely it will not stop with just cloud. Any other questions, Michael? I'm not seeing the chat here.
We did get one question. Can we get access to slides? Of course, we will send those along to you. But Nicole, I had a question. So if we're talking about prepaid token-based models, how do you go about implementing pricing and packaging changes? How straightforward is that?
Very interesting. We only touched on it today because the session was going to be a high-level overview. Token-based models are very often a pay upfront, burn down model. And what that means is that really you get to define what the value of a token is. And your customers buy those tokens, say 100 a piece or whatever, and burns them down. If you make pricing and packaging changes, that's very easy to implement with tokens, because you basically just change what the value of a token is or what a token can be used for. That is why we find that model so wildly interesting, because it gives you all flexibility. A token-based monetization model technically has a price book and rate tables in the background, so that the system understands automatically what the customer has bought, when they've bought it, what they can use it for. And then if the supplier changes it, it's basically a relatively easy change to make, to say, okay, now you can also use token. You could only use tokens for product A, but now you can use it for product B. Or per transaction, we charge 1 token. Now we are starting to charge 2 tokens starting next month. That becomes a configuration change. And that's why this model is so interesting, because it opens a lot of opportunities, especially when you think about AI and data models, where everyone, I think, still has a little bit of homework to do in finding out what works best for yourselves, but then also for your customers. Great question.
Yep. And hopefully people are feeding back the data that they're receiving and analyzing to help inform those pricing and packaging changes. Well,
absolutely.
We are up on time. Nicole, thank you so much, as always, for sharing your experience and your insights today. Always great getting you on our webinars to hear from you directly. And thank you to everybody in the audience for joining us today. Please be sure to reach out after the webinar if you think of any other questions you have. So with that, thank you all and have a great day. Take care.
Thanks all. I hope this was helpful. Speak to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.